So, ladies and gentlemen, we're thrilled to have with us this morning the Vice President for e-Mobility at e.On. Please help me welcome Matthias Wiecher.
Good morning. As said, thank you for introducing me. My name is Matthias. I'm with e.On and responsible for our electric mobility activities. And I'm very happy to be here today, this morning, although it is the early bird session. So I appreciate especially all of you joining in the room here to listen to how, as the title says, EV charging transforms until 2025. And this is not just about how EV charging transforms, but also how it is requiring for us to transform. So us being e.On, the energy company. So I've got a couple of stories about transformation, which might fit to how some of you still feel transforming back from sort of being out late at night and sort of getting up early this morning. So the first story of transformation is about the transformation of e.On. So this is basically the state at which we are now, but sort of bear with me by sort of just going backwards a couple of years. So a couple of years ago, e.On was still a company full of central power plants, both coal as well as nuclear, a huge trading environment around sort of trading gas, oil, and electricity, and then also the grids and also the customer solutions business, so helping customers with energy and commodity products. And the transformation that we've been going through over the last couple of years has been narrowing down and focusing on making the energy transition happen. So what we've been doing is we've been focusing on two areas by spinning off businesses, by acquiring businesses, and really doubling down on energy transition by firstly being one of the biggest energy network operators in Europe. So being the grid that connects energy transition and makes all of this possible. And without this as an enabler, it's not going to work to sort of get all the EVs connected, but also all the decentral renewable energy assets connected to the grid so that all of this works as one system. And then secondly, the second part is based on this enabling grid to help customers ultimately be part of this transition, be part of the energy transition, but also be part, and this is what we'll be talking about today, the mobility transition. And we're doing this, so these are just the boring facts, headquartered of Essen, 80,000 employees. But ultimately, it's really about networks, sort of building the grid and operating and developing the grid that ultimately enables energy transitions. And secondly, then based on this, provide solutions for energy and mobility transition products for our customers. Based on this, we are in the process of, on this basis, to sort of start the next transformation, which will be focusing on three pillars. So the first pillar is real sustainability. So looking at how can we improve our sort of own footprint by working on the grid corridors and making those ecologically work. Secondly, joining forces with different programs like the UNEP that you see here to really help across the globe to work on sustainability and ultimately also pledge ourselves to become climate neutral as a company by 2045. The second piece are really growth, and here the key part of growth is to help us grow based on digital platforms and sort of ultimately move also here the transformation from an old traditional energy company to one that is based on digital architectures and digital products. And lastly, digitalization, as I already said, to really work on building the digital basis for the business that we're driving. So this has context of what e.On does and how we are pushing. Now, how does EV charging transform? So ultimately, as we talk about 2025 and we look at what is now sort of one of the objectives and expectations on how 2025 is going to look like, it does require us as e.On, but also us here all in the room to transform as well. And I've got some thoughts around how this transformation needs to be happening on the energy grid side as well as on the customer solution side, as one doesn't go without the other. And to build a bit of a basis for this, I've just done some math exercises. So the next numbers are not my prediction, they are just sort of some, as I said, some math. So one report, I think we've used Bloomberg here, says that in 2025 we're going to have 22 million electric vehicles on the road. So these are both passenger vehicles as well as commercial vehicles. And if you then sort of just run this through, what does that mean? So 22 million vehicles means, based on this prediction, give or take, there's going to be 12 million charge points somewhere. So those are private, sort of in the work environment, obviously also the public ones. But also here, the majority of those will be in the private environment, sort of at work and at home, although obviously the public ones get significantly more attention and parts of the discussion. And then, again, sort of running this through, this means around 51 billion kilowatt hours of additional electricity that those vehicles need. And this needs to be, obviously, I mean, this is just, I think, 2% of the energy production or energy consumption that we have in Europe now. So that doesn't sound like much. But what we have to keep in mind is for this to make sense sustainably and environmentally, this needs to be renewable energy. And for this to be renewable energy, it needs to be new renewable energy. Otherwise, we are sort of just moving the green electrons from left to right. So we're not really making an improvement by driving electric. So just assuming that all of this renewable energy comes out of windmills, that basically requires us to build 13,000 additional windmills somewhere in time to be able to say that actually we've got a positive impact from driving electric vehicles. And I think it's important, whenever we talk about EVs here, is that to a certain extent, we run this through to the end. Because there's no point for us to push for cars and cars and cars without sort of at the same time making sure that all the other pieces fall into place, because otherwise we just have more of the same cars, likely with the wrong energy in it, so we're not really making a difference in terms of environmental friendliness and sustainability. Of course, the driving is going to be cooler, as we all know here, but that's not the only reason why we're doing this, I guess. So if we keep those numbers in mind and sort of always refer back to those, is what does that mean then for, as I said earlier, for us on the energy grid side and for us on the customer solution side? Oh, actually, there's one thought for it. I mean, I talked about sustainability and us trying to sort of help this to reach net zero. And obviously, all those numbers, again, this is just one of many forecasts. I think this is not the most aggressive nor the most conservative one, so it's somewhere in the middle. It begs the question whether this is actually going to be enough for us to reach net zero. And the answer is not really. Because ultimately, for us, again, net zero is more of a global question than a European or a German one, right? But globally, just those numbers that are being predicted now are not enough. So arguably, across the globe, we need more of all of the above, sort of more electric vehicles, sort of more charge points, more grid connections, and more renewables to ultimately achieve the net zero that we all require to sort of to stop climate change and sort of keep the planet as habitable as we are used to having it. At the same time, and that's good news, is if you look at the global comparison, Europe is ahead when it comes to sort of adoption of electric vehicles and making this transition work. So for me, this means two things. On the one hand, we should push in Europe even further, because arguably there are going to be regions that will be lagging behind for quite some time, and also for good reasons. I think us as an industrial nation, we can't really expect a developing nation to sort of not be okay to do the same mistakes that we've made. Right? Sort of there is sort of for us as developed nations, but also then ultimately for E.ON as a company to sort of be ahead here and sort of drive this even further and doing more than our fair share. And secondly, and I think this is one that it drives me quite a bit, is we as Europe can actually sort of show how it can work. Sort of by us sort of being ahead here and trying to connect all those dots in a way that it becomes a more sustainable system, we have the opportunity to show and showcase how it can be done. And this is sort of more than even just trying to sort of connect another box or sort of get another EV on the road. Ultimately, this is about a system that can work. So how do we want to do this? So ultimately, I think there's a slide missing in here. So let me do the network slide without one. So when it comes to the networks, ultimately the challenges that we have are twofold. Let's just go back here. On the one hand, obviously, we need to connect and make work those 12 million wall boxes. And on the other hand, we need to connect all those 13,000 windmills and more. and those need to work. So we're actually pushing from both sides into something that is in between there as the connecting fabric of the energy transition. So what are we doing on the grid side? On the grid side, and this is a perfect example of an industry that has a long planning horizon, right? Sort of it takes forever. But at the same time, and this is good that we've now sort of made some commitments as a society that in Germany we're working towards a sort of a net zero 2045 environment. So what this allows our grid colleagues to do is now plan 2045 in a way that it allows Germany or our grid regions to be sustainable and be towards net zero. So all in all, we are sort of planning now for what is going to be required in 35 and in 45. And one thing that, and I guess we are just, 3 days from a general election, so I guess it's okay to do sort of one political shout out here. The one thing that sort of is still required for us to be able to reach net zero is to reduce the amount of time that it requires to get all the permits in place, for instance, build one line. So one line sort of usually takes 8 years from I want to build it to I've got the permits and can start building. And if you have 8 years and we want to achieve something in 2030 or 2045 and we are in 2021, you already know that we are too late. So there is something that we need to do there. And secondly, and this is, I guess, in the same context, a question to all of us, we'll need to make choices. Because right now, obviously, we are sort of debating every overhead line and every sort of windmill on, do I want this in my backyard? Right? And we need to make the choice. We can't have both. Right? So you can't have not anything of the new stuff and then still become net zero. So there's going to be a moment where we need to make choices and say that potentially it's more important to reach net zero and then live with the fact that there is an overhead line or a windmill not too close to where I live. Because if we choose the other route, there might not be an ability to live where I live if we are close to the sea. And the next thing that is important, and here I just want to also sort of put this into context, right? Sort of whenever we talk about the grids, there's often a talk about, in Germany, the Paragraph 14a, so the ability to steer loads, right? Which I understand from a customer perspective is, first of all, no, I don't want this. I don't want someone, right, to be able to steer anything in my home. But to also say this, I guess here I'm preaching to the converted, it's simply a requirement to be able to connect 12 million boxes. So we need to have the ability to put intelligence into the system, and this is what 14a is, right? It is putting intelligence into the system for us to be able to work more intelligently with all of the different components that will now become part of what we call the energy system. And then on the renewable energy side, I think there is a good thing, is we're doing this for some time, and we now know how that works. Sort of e.On alone has connected 800,000 decentral energy sort of generation assets to our grids. So this is something that has been going on for some time, but also here we need to obviously pick up the pace and also make the speed of permits and all of the things happen. So that's the last political shout out for today, but it is the one thing that even if we all want to be faster, that's simply a brick wall that we are hitting on a regular basis of not being able to speed up what is required to be done. So now moving to the second part, the customer solutions. So here, ultimately, we are working on doing 3 things. Sort of on the end, we ourselves are working on sort of in the sense of preaching, sort of drinking the wine that you're preaching. Decarbonation ourselves, as I said earlier, so to become climate neutral as a company by 2040 and really pushing our own transition towards a net zero environment. Secondly, this is one thing that I guess also has been a bit of theme in some of the other discussions that we've had here is to not just allow charging, but to somewhat make it one that is sort of an experience that is somewhat pleasant, so that you don't dread that you again have to sort of get out and get the cable or use a cable, but rather make this an environment that is nice and pleasant. I wouldn't go as far as saying that it's something you look forward to, right? But at least something that you're not dreading to do. And one of the things that we're doing here is we've designed together with Berlin architects that are not too far from where we are here, it's a roof, but it's also a site concept that's very modular that can breathe with market developments that ultimately makes this a more pleasant environment. and we're rolling those out as we speak. And the second one is really around picking up the customer where the customer is, and who are the customers. For us, customers are, and this is sort of the focus that we have in terms of the solutions that we want to provide to our customers around, on the one hand, on the B2C side, so the every Joe at home is around, in terms of charging promise, to enable to, again, connect and build an ecosystem of charging together with PV, with a storage, with a sort of on-the-go tariff, and make this something that is simply working, right? That you can rely on and make as easy as possible. And then secondly, and this is where we at the moment see the biggest requirement in terms of pushing for an EV transition, is on the sort of fleet and real estate side. Because we still see that this is where EV transitions happen first. This is where sort of via company cars, via leasing cars, via simple, like we do ourselves, via corporate social responsibility targets, you're pushing for electric vehicle adoption, right? And this then requires you to, obviously, at the workplace or as sort of in buildings, to provide the charging, otherwise it's not going to work. And this is where we then sort of with customers, often coming back to the digital part from earlier, based on digital tools, try to really make this as easy and as fast as possible, but also here as economically feasible as possible. So here again comes the grid part into this, sort of by trying to sort of make the best use of an existing infrastructure, an existing grid connection, to not just solve every problem with more copper in the ground. And in doing so, this is a bit of the status quo of what we're doing in electric mobility, sort of in e.On. It's really around, I mean, I've said this a couple of times, striving towards sustainable utility and making this the ultimate perspective and goal of what we're trying to accomplish. And then from there, build the solutions and provide the solutions that make this sustainable mobility possible. So it's around integration, the best-in-class hardware and software and installations to ultimately sort of be fit for the job. Obviously, combine this with green energy. Again, without that, it's not really helping, other than, again, a better driving experience. Sort of then last but not least, do this for sort of predominantly B2Bs at this point, but then more and more towards the sort of the end customers that become more and more in the driver's seat to actually making those choices on, do I now drive electric or not? So with this, I sort of open it for questions. So again, I think the key part here is thinking EV transition all the way through the end. Right? So it's not just the car, it doesn't stop with a plug, it stops with having a green electron in your car. And only then can we say that we are making a sustainable change for it. So thank you for listening. I'm looking forward to questions and discussion.